Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. One of the terms particularly central to interpretation of the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus is that of logos. And this is what we could call an ambiguous or polysemous term in Greek. It has a wide range of meaning. I'm not saying necessarily we need to read all of these potential meanings into Heraclitus' use of logos, but we should keep in mind that it doesn't signify just one thing. Rather, the meanings of the term are connected with each other. And it is quite true, as we're going to see, that Heraclitus makes the logos, you could say with a capital T and capital L, central to his metaphysics and even his, what we can call epistemology, his inquiry into how it is that human beings come to know things or have wisdom or have a correct account of anything. But he also uses the word in a few other senses. So that's where I want to begin before jumping into the first passage that's really central to the overall metaphysical conception of the logos, which is fragment 1. I think it's useful to work our way into the Heraclitean logos by contrasting it to two other uses of logos in the fragments. And what we're going to talk about here is going to stick to those fragments in which the term logos or, cognates of it actually appear. We're not going to try to read it into all sorts of other fragments as well, although that certainly is possible to do. And I suppose we should keep in mind that we are working with fragments coming down to us largely from philosophers who are distant from Heraclitus in time, and we're piecing them together into an account, so there is some interpretation involved here. So, in fragment 118, in the Deals accounting of the fragments, he tells us that of the accounts, logos, he's using there, that's the plural for logos, that he has heard or listened to, none lead one to know something particularly important. So what he's saying here, just to begin with, is that there are other logoi, other accounts, other ways of explaining things out there already, and he has heard some of them, but none of them do what's really important. And what is that? He says that they don't communicate to us, or they don't allow us to know, literally, gignosken, that in principle, or in terms of wisdom, right, the wise is different from everything else. So the wise here is sophon, which could be the wise person, or it could be wisdom itself, right? Something that's in you could say, a privileged position as far as understanding what's really going on. And this word differing, okay, that's an interesting way to translate. It's not a terrible way, but it could also be said to be distanced from everything else. The Greek word is menon, being taken to a distance, distancing itself from everything else, meaning that there are the ways in which everybody else understands the world, and then there's the way in which the person who has genuine knowledge understands the world. And the logoi that are being given of how the world works, and what might these logoi be? Well, we know at other places Heraclitus criticizes, for example, poets like Homer and Hesiod. So maybe what we have here are mythological accounts, or perhaps it's other pre-Socratic philosophers who we don't actually know, or it's other thinkers, right? He's saying that these accounts are deficient. And so logos, at least in this passage, is not something true. It's something false. It gets things wrong. It doesn't lead us into understanding the way things truly are. Keep that in your back pocket for a moment. There's another passage where he talks about soul. And there are quite a few passages where Heraclitus discusses soul. And psyche, soul, the word we get psychology from, by the way, is something distinctively human, right? It's a way in which we, beings that are connected with the Logos in some way, grasp the world. Here he's not so interested in the overall arching Logos. Here he's talking about a Logos that is, you might say, particularized to the living being. And he discusses this in fragment 115. So here's what he says about that. It's a very short passage. Here's a translation of it. So soul is something that is got its own process of growth within it, right? Psyches esti logos, there's the logos term, heauton auxon. Auxon is coming, auxesis is the noun for that, growth, development, right? And the psyches here is a possessive. There is a logos, a principle, an account that we could understand, a principle driving it, a sort of rationality to it. There is a logos for the soul, or of the soul, of its own process of growth. So what goes on within the living being is subject to a logos. Not, I won't say a law, but a sort of rationality, something that we can uncover and talk about. Now, I mentioned that the sort of most important passage, what we might call the royal road into the notion of logos, is fragment 1. So we should take a look at that very closely. It's a longer fragment than most of the other fragments that we have. And here's a translation of it. But of this principle, logos, which holds forever, people prove ignorant, not only before they hear it, but once they have heard it. For although everything happens in accordance with this principle, they, the people, resemble those with no familiarity with it, even after they have become familiar with the kind of accounts and events I discuss as I distinguish each thing according to its nature and explain its constitution. But the general run of people are as unaware of their actions while awake as they are what they do while asleep. So what is Heraclitus telling us in this very rich and suggestive passage? Well, he wrote a book called On Nature that we, according to legend about this, perhaps, reliably, he dedicated to the temple of Diana. And, presumably it was quite a long and interesting and coherent work in which he was providing accounts about how things work in the world. And he was presumably not just writing a book and saying, hey, whoever wants to read it, go ahead and read it. He was presumably going around and talking to people about this as well. So what he discovers, what he sets down here, is that people don't actually grasp what he's talking about. And what is he talking about? He is talking about the logos. The logos is a discourse. And here's where we have sort of, you might say, two sides of it. So on the one hand, the logos is what is said, legisthai, right? The thing in Greek that actually undergoes the talking, the giving an account, right? So we have what we might call a verbal representation or verbal account of things, but that's supposed to be of what actually is the case, which is also the logos, the underlying rationality or structure that is being brought into language and being depicted. So he's saying that everything happens in accordance, kataton logon, everything happens in accordance with this logos. Everything is, as he'll say in other places, governed or structured or determined by it. And yet people don't get it. They are satisfied with more superficial and fragmentary explanations of the universe or nature, how things actually work, including of their own place in it and of themselves. So this is kind of an interesting place to begin. What it's suggesting to us is that there is out there, actually we can't even say out there because we're in there, we're part of it. There is just the totality of the world or the universe or nature, and it is governed all the way down to the bottom by this logos, which we human beings can provide a logos on our own part of, which could be correct or incorrect, could connect up with the logos or could go astray from it. Now, another thing that he tells us in passage, fragment 2, is that logos is common. What do we mean by common? Well, let's take a look at the passage itself. He says, one ought to follow what is common, although the principle, logos, is common. The majority of people live as though they had private understanding. So, common here is actually translating two closely related, but at least in this passage, different terms. Xunos, kai, and kai is and, koinos. Koinos is a much more common term in later ancient Greek. Koinonia is sharing in something or community in something. And so what is koinos is what is shared or participated in by some group or community, or it could be all sorts of other things. We get the word koine, which describes the later Greek of, say, Epictetus and the New Testament, from this term koinos. Greek became a common language, a shared language, right? Xunos is a term that is more used in Heraclitus and other ancient authors. And it has a similar connotation of belonging to a group. So if we talk about having a common meal together, that could be a xunon, right? That could be something that is shared in that way. And so the logos is shared or common in that respect. It pervades everything. There is no escape from it. It's everywhere and in everything. And at the same time, human beings don't realize that, and that's part of how they get so mixed up. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. In another passage, he talks about listening not to Heraclitus, but rather to listening to the logos, and if we do that, then we will realize that all is actually one. Now, does that mean that Heraclitus himself was a sort of, what we nowadays call a pantheist? Not necessarily. It could be that what he's trying to convey there is that everything is part of one gigantic dynamic system, which we could have some account of. It's got its own logos that we can, engage in depiction or understanding of, right? In another passage, which actually comes to us from Marcus Aurelius, very interestingly, who thought that Heraclitus was quite onto something, Marcus Aurelius is probably one of the Stoic authors who we have who brings up Heraclitus the most, and probably seemed to have been affected quite a bit by Heraclitus, and probably had access to more of Heraclitus's doctrines than we do. There's a very interesting passage where he says that this is what Heraclitus said. Humans are involved with the logos, and the word there is homelus, right? Which could mean having intimate conversation. It has a connotation sometimes of actually being opposed to, but you're opposed to because you are actually connected with. In this case, I don't think it's meaning opposed to. Another translation is humans are intimate with the logos, and that logos governs all. It is over everything, but they are distanced from it. And the Greek term there, tuto diapherontai. Diapheron is used in other places in Heraclitus. And we could translate it in a very cognate way as difference, right? It is the word that we get difference from through Latin and then into English. Diapherontai literally means there's this sense of carrying or bearing something away. So things are different from each other, like these two books, because they aren't the same. There's things that carry them away from each other. And so we human beings, if we want to use this sort of spatial language, are intimately involved with the logos, and at the same time we distance ourselves from it, or it distances itself from us and our erroneous interpretations of it as we try to make it into something that it's not, or we ignore its features and don't fully understand it. So that's an interesting one. And then finally, there is one example, at least in the fragments that we do possess of Heraclitus. Probably there was a lot more in his original book if we had it, of a cosmic process in which Heraclitus talks about the logos. And here's a translation of it. The turning points of fire. We could be a little bit more elaborate with this. This is how fire develops itself. First sea, thalasha, and of sea, half is earth, and half is what we translate as lightning or the thundercloud or something like that. It's one of those terms in Greek that people aren't quite sure how to translate, but it seems to mean something like that. So this is discussing how fire, which is this cosmic stuff that everything ultimately is involved with or is made of, develops itself into other things, according to Heraclitus. Now here's where it gets interesting in terms of the logos. He goes on and he says, sea drains off and is measured into the same principle as before it became earth. Now, measured into the same principle is literally the word for measuring, right? The verb, and then it's aston, auton, logon. Quite literally in Greek, into the same logos. So, logos is governing the cosmic process by which everything is exchanged for fire, and fire becomes everything else, however we want to understand that. The cosmic process of change, development, all the other things that we could include in that are governed by the logos. So if we develop a true account, which is what Heraclitus thinks that he's done, of the logos, then we have something that is, you could say, a verbal interpretation of the capital L logos that everything is involved with and can't get away from.